Imagine yourself in two scenarios. In the first, you email an acquaintance offering them $200 for their bike. The acquaintance sends an email to their spouse saying, I'm tired of these greedy, selfish pricks that keep trying to lowball me. But instead of sending it to their spouse, they accidentally send it to you. In the second scenario, you send that same email offering $200 for a bike, but this time to a stranger. And the stranger makes the same mistake, sending an email intended for their spouse to you instead, calling you a greedy, selfish prick or whatever. Two questions. First, which of these insults do you think would hurt most in the moment you read it? Second, which of these insults would hurt the most 5 minutes later? If you're a rational pure person like me or the Harvard psychologist that led a study similar to this, you would predict that the insult from the acquaintance would hurt more, both in the moment and 5 minutes later, than the insult from the stranger. And if so, congrats. You pass. You get 50%, a solid D. Because as Daniel Gilbert, the psychologist who led this study and the author of the well-known book Stumbling Upon Happiness, wrote in his very intriguing and insightful and motivating paper, The Peculiar Longevity of Things Not So Bad. It's true that we will feel more pain from the insults or the mean words from the acquaintance up front, but 5 minutes later, we'll actually feel less pain from that insult from the acquaintance than from the stranger. Gilbert coined this the Regent Beta paradox, a name that is really not so bad, but not good at all. So it actually falls victim to itself. And I prefer to call it the not so bad paradox because it just sounds like a better name to me. You can call it how you want. Whatever you call it, the underlying psychology behind it and what causes this counterintuitive phenomena is incredibly important to understand because it has dramatic implications on the choices that we make in life and preventing us from falling into the complacency trap and tolerating a life of festering mediocrity. Gilbert explains how it happens and how the insult from the acquaintance would actually hurt less in just a few minutes by explaining what he calls the psychological immune system. I like to compare the psychological immune system to an overprotective mother. When you get hurt, she rushes to your aid, saying, "Oh my gosh, my dear, are you okay?" And then, to soothe you, she provides a whole bunch of excuses and lies. For example, in the case of this email, she may say, "Oh, you know what? That person's a prick anyways. You know that. Don't believe anything they say." Or maybe, "You were just joking, weren't you, with that $200 email? I mean, you have to negotiate anyways. You're not a cheapskate and not a selfish prick. Not at all. You're wonderful." Those sort of things. And they work because your overcoddling mom of a psychological immune system knows you better than anyone. So you feel better, or at least not as bad as you do when it doesn't step in. And so your psychological immune system steps in not just for insults, but for all sorts of things, for hardships in relationships like getting dumped, for getting fired, for breaking a leg, for anything that goes awry, for running into a pole when you're parking and convincing yourself you're still not a bad driver, that sort of thing. But here's the catch. It only steps in once that injury or insult reaches a certain threshold. If it's minor, like an insult from a stranger who you have never met and never will meet because there's no chance that they are going to be selling you their bike for $200, your psychological immune system stays on their couch worrying about more important things like why you're not more successful, happy, or attractive. And so it only really gets out of its couch when something terrible happens. I can think of lots of examples of this happening in my own life. For example, my big nose. For 20 years of my life, I couldn't breathe through it because of a deviated septum. So I breathe through my mouth, which, as it turns out, is not very healthy for you and leads to having a big nose and longer face than I could have had otherwise. I only got my deviated septum fixed when I broke my nose again and had the chance to take it in to go and get surgery. Now, I can clearly breathe through my nose. It's a breath of fresh air and I feel great. Unfortunately, my face will always tell the story. Another example is here where I live. Vancouver. I'm here in the summer and it's great, but in the winter it sucks. And my then girlfriend, now wife at the time, and we lived here and tolerated it for 3 years until our apartment got demolished. That forced us to look for a new place. But since we weren't tied down to Vancouver, we decided, hey, why not try going somewhere warmer, like Medellin, Colombia? And that's what we did. And that led to what has become a life of eternal summering, where for the last 6 years, we have been swapping back and forth between Vancouver and Cape Town. And it's fantastic. It never would have happened, might not have ever happened, had our place not been demolished. A third example is my business, the Zag, part of which is this video you're watching, this channel you're watching. Up until recently, most of my income was coming from ads on my website, which got between 50 and 100,000 visitors a month. It wasn't so bad, but it certainly wasn't great either. I didn't like the ads. The visitors didn't like the ads. No one did. And then Google changed its algorithm and traffic tanked by 95%. So there went that business. That sucked, obviously. It still sucks to lose that money, but it's forced me to make some moves to turn the Zag into more of an impactful and rewarding business by creating programs like my Systematic Brilliance program, which is coaching, and another one that I'm working on that's going to help people like you and me find our superpowers. I can think of like many, many, many more examples where the region beta paradox, or where the not so bad paradox held me back from my potential, and I waited until something terrible to happen before I took action. I'm sure you can too. The question is, why haven't I been more proactive? And also, what is not so bad in my life that I would be so much better off with if I took action and did something? I suggest you ask the same. A couple of approaches you can take to be more proactive in finding these things. One is what I call the catastrophic catalyst. So think of things in your life that are okay, not so bad, but maybe slightly painful. A bad job, a not great relationship, crappy home. And then imagine something catastrophic happened. For example, a meteor comes and strikes your home when no one's home, fortunately. What would you do? Where would you move? Right? Then, rather than wait for that catastrophe to happen, make the move proactively. What would you do? Right? Another alternative is a lot more boring, but maybe better at helping you identify these sort of festering issues. And that's just to keep a log of everything you do. Track it. And then a week later, a month later, a year later, look back. See what didn't look right. What don't you approve of? And that distance, that broader perspective can help you identify those things. And then again, make your move. Be proactive about breaking things. A third alternative, I think the best alternative of all, but one that nobody ever does because of the quote, one of my favorite quotes from Oliver Burkeman, the author of 4,000 Weeks, is, the advice you need the most is most often the advice you don't want to hear. So the strategy here is to go and ask someone who you believe is wise for their advice on what you should do to challenge this not so bad paradox. If you do so, good on you for listening to someone else's advice. I find it hard to do too. Whatever you decide to do, I hope the takeaway you get from it is this. To proactively break what's not so bad but not yet broken. To distrust your instinct that this is going to hurt too much and for too long afterwards. And instead, trust your psychological immune system, that it's going to come in and soothe you and make it feel not so bad.